Thank you so much. So happy to be here. And thanks to Goodhue for reaching out and connecting. I was going to give a little context, a little backstory. I don't know if that's my my thing. I'm an editor by trade, filmmaker for the past 30 years, and I'm used to dealing with disparate parts being handed to me, almost like a puzzle or multiple puzzles that I then need to scour through and separate what is crucial or essential. And I think sometimes you can get lost in the weeds, but that skill set, I think, is translated to some of my presentations. Not meaning that I'm going to bore you with my history that doesn't have anything to do with Soulforce, but I think the journey is worth teasing out. So I may put my friend Daryl to sleep, guaranteed. But yeah, this is Soulforce, the movements of memory. And if anybody's familiar with the term Soulforce, it has Gandhian roots, meaning almost righteous indignation. I think Gandhi was influenced by the suffrage movement in England. Women who couldn't necessarily engage in the masculinity or alpha male violence and protest that men could, but still got results for their rights to vote. And since India was colonized by England, it was interesting that he looked at the colonizers' techniques for what might work in kicking them out of India. And obviously, or maybe not obviously, but Martin Luther King was very influenced by Mahatma Gandhi. And this is my family who has roots in Hastings, just to sort of tie in the Goodhue Dakota County connection. They have a home that's still standing on 4th and River. Is there beef between Red Wing and Hastings, or have y'all sort of worked out? There's no sort of St. Paul, Minneapolis thing like we've got better history, or, all right. Oh, there is a little.
They used to be in the same conference in sports, but now they're in two different ones, so that isn't as big as it used to be.
Oh, sports. I should have thought of that. That makes sense. Well, who won more championships? Was it football or baseball, or what was the?
Football was a competition mostly.
And when they went up against each other, that was, oh, that's cool. And no one knows the record of, like, or is it pretty even? Interesting.
It was called the Big Nine.
The big what?
Big Nine. Big Nine schools.
Oh, okay. That's a topic already.
Side and they sat on that side. That's pretty much how.
Were there fights? Ooh, yeah, this is fun. So I'm comfortable with uncomfortable history. So forgive me if I either pry or unearth or excavate beef. But I think because of maybe because of a dysfunctional family, I'm comfortable with that kind of dysfunction. But anyways. Great-grandpa and grandpa, great-grandma and grandpa have a home that's still standing in Hastings. They originally came from Harrisonburg, Virginia, 1890s. Childhood sweethearts. One of the, I guess my great-aunt, not I guess, but my great-aunt. No, she's just a great-aunt. Happened to be a valedictorian, which I think was a rare thing for a woman of color, a black woman, to be valedictorian of the Hastings High School, but she was nevertheless.
And what year was that?
Yeah, so I think I think Florence probably graduated in 1907 or 08.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
There was also a founding of an AME chapel called Brown's Chapel in Hastings. That this is really the only picture that exists, not only of their congregation or a portion of their congregation, but probably the black community in Hastings or the surrounding areas. Not as in Goodhue, but the church did attract folks from Trimble, Prescott, and Point Douglas, where there were pockets of African Americans. The church existed from 1892 until 1907. Is that 15 years? I think it is. No, I'm sorry, it might be 1882. Numbers aren't my thing. But it was burned to the, it was burned to its foundation in 1907 after celebrating their 15th anniversary, or near there. And both papers weren't sure if it was, because papers came out weekly, neither of the two papers, the Gazette or the Democrat, were sure if it was a Monday night or Saturday night. But it puts it in the week of Halloween. There was no investigation, and you really couldn't, no one's been able to investigate and see if it's Klan related, because really the Klan had its rise after the 1915 showing of Birth of a Nation, although that's based on a book called The Klansman, which came out in 08, I think. So there just may have been seeds of Klanish-like activity, but not an act of the Klan, which I think Red Wing maybe grappled with, cross burnings on Barnes Bluff, or yep. But there, so I guess I'm segueing into racial acts of terror, maybe to set the table for Soulforce and the response from communities that are oppressed by these acts of terror or brutality. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Nininger or the large Klan rally that happened back in 25. I think it was they were trying to hold it in Hastings, but the mayor of Hastings, and there was some fisticuffs, and I don't know what kind of grounds the mayor was standing on, but he did not want it happening in his city, the gathering or a cross burning. Maybe he was okay with the gathering because I think there were incidents, or I know I've read of incidents of riding around town and Klan presence in Hastings. Not even strictly for African Americans. They also weren't cool with Catholics. I don't think there were Jews at the time, but they also didn't like drinking and adultery. So I don't know what kind of moral basis they were terrorizing people. But anyways, it occurred out in Nininger, which has an interesting history if you want to look into its roots, which I won't digress any further. Probably due to World War I as well as opportunity, there was a black citizenry exodus out of Hastings. The Curry family was a family of 10, but there were a number of other black families that disappeared. I spoke to James Lowen about this, the author of Sundown Towns, and Lies My Teacher told me. It basically qualified for a sundown town requirement, not so much that there was a bell that got rung at the end of once the sun went down to send a message that black folks were not welcome after a certain period, which is an entirely northern phenomenon that kind of preceded Jim Crow laws and black codes. But it was a way to send a message to African Americans that they'd better batten down. If they lived there, they'd better stay at home, and others weren't welcome to come into the town. So after the church burning, that kind of is a big enough message to send through the grapevine that it's not a welcoming town to African Americans. To go back to this, I think the opportunities might naturally happen for a small town African American community to head to the cities for better jobs, or in the case of World War I, they volunteered to fight. In the case of the valedictorian and my other aunts, great aunts, schools outside of the city of Hastings. So that depletes the community, and I think there's a record of the last black man, I think they called him colored, in 1954, died in Hastings. So basically white, the sort of whiteness that the town was desiring with the church burning ended up occurring and making it an all-white community by the time the 50s rolled around. I'll skip past some of my aunts to get to Soulforce. But are you thinking? I'm telling you to go. Oh, there's lots of graphics that are slow and to respond. So yeah, a lot of the I come from the South Minneapolis community. I didn't grow up in South Minneapolis, but my dad did, and these are the older versions of the uncles or my grandpa in the pictures, as well as the congregations of the AME. So I want to just sort of reinforce this strength-based resilience of black communities. Because you burn down a church doesn't mean that we don't know how to roll with it and build another church. So I think at the time, there was about 12 different AMEs. And the picture is speckled with some of the foundational families that came from smaller towns and gravitated to Minneapolis. Almost like a mini Great Migration from smaller towns to metropolitan areas, which was a thing. More so in the South than in the North, but it's happening. If anybody's familiar with the St. Paul community, I've got a cousin named Katie McWatt who was one of the first sort of DFL endorsed black folk or black women to run for city council. She did not get it. It was close. In fact, there's even a little gossip about the ballot stuffing that I encountered. And her husband, Arthur McWatt, who wrote a great book, and you can still find it on some of these unsung black maverick heroes and sheroes, if you want to dig in to that. And there seems to be a small wave, at least in the 2000s, of naming some of these black heroes and heroines in the form of street signs. So.
James, is that the same Paul? Is that
Yeah,
Paul? Okay,
yeah. This is turning into a family slideshow. I already lost one person. I'm sorry. But I just think that perhaps on some Freudian or subconscious level, I'm excavating my history due to my multi-ethnicity. I want to almost tether the roots. Or maybe it's even an age thing where I'm going through the Alex Haley roots genealogy idea that just happens to affect some people. But my dad did some digging in Hastings. As Bethany mentioned, I'm interested in, or we're about 75% there to build a Black Heritage Trail, sort of commemorating the church. space where it was there. There's now just a house there. But also the African-American presence that existed on all parts of the town. It's almost, if you're familiar with Leduc, General Leduc had a stable person named George Daniels, who they thought was sort of who Hastings sort of talked about as their semi-famous black person, simply because of his proximity to Leduc and living on the Leduc mansion. But as we've collaborated, we've discovered a lot more. In fact, the town shut down when my great-grandpa died. So there was this interesting relationship between the black community and greater white Hastings that I felt like was worthwhile. And I've collaborated with some of these great folks that volunteer for their historical societies, the Pioneer Room, and did lots of digging into the files. Luckily, there was a file called the black file or the colored file that kept every article pertaining to blacks in the community, which was helpful. And if you want to, finally I'm getting to some exhibit stuff. If you want to check out a permanent installation on this kind of lens that looks at the African American community in Dakota County and I think greater counties. I don't know what Lakeville is in, or yeah, I'm not sure what county Lakeville's in, but this exhibit at the Loshie Museum sort of tracks, I'd say, 60 to 80 years of the presence of African Americans in these smaller counties, such as Dakota. So feel free to check it out. I did form, as Bethany mentioned, a 501c3 nonprofit to sort of come up with a mission and develop this idea of commemoration and memorialization, including the house as well as other homes, and finding spots with the city council, who's been extremely helpful and supportive of our efforts. Some future projects, I think that I've already mentioned, is the trail. I'd love a small little African American museum, maybe to house greater Minnesota's African American presence. We know of Prior Lake, and obviously, maybe not obviously, but St. Cloud, just sort of maybe tracking that finally and seeing, I know Jimmy Jam Harris of the time, his dad, Cornbread Harris, hails from Prior Lake. So I'm a filmmaker, if I didn't mention, by nature, and I shot a couple fiction and nonfiction films that have won some awards. And I was interested in the visual aspects of, when it comes to turning these historical stories into works of art. And one involved engaging with a Marvel DC illustrator on a book called Hastings, which really is more of a first issue of a larger story that I've got applications to turn into a graphic novel that explore this history in a young adult comic book form, which I think is fun. All historically based except for dialogue, because I have no idea. Except in rare cases where there's been a deposition, I can't cite dialogue. But these are oral histories and histories that have primary and or secondary sources, which maybe I'll start selling a few copies or get you.
We have some here.
Oh, okay, look at that. Yeah, finally. Thank you for that, Bethany, I forgot. And if you need more, let me know. I'm not including myself as a maverick here. I just happened, that's the only picture I have of Debbie Montgomery. Let's see, I should know what she is. She's, besides being St. Paul's first black female police officer, I don't even think she's the first, because there was one back prior to her. But she's got a street named after her. She's like a living, it's neat to be, I think signage, there was a law that you couldn't be living and have the sign made until you pass on. But I know at least 3 African Americans who have signage or streets named after them in Minneapolis and St. Paul that are still living. But yeah, early NAACP photo happening in St. Paul there on the lower left corner. Volunteers for World War I in the middle in St. Paul. Afro-American Women's Club, circa late 1800s. Debbie, the lawyer, first black lawyer in Minnesota, Frederick McGee, his home and family. Lena Reagan, the pastor of the AME church that was burned down. And then Andrea Jenkins, a Minnesota city council person, who I think just retired this year. And I am putting Daryl to sleep, just to let everybody know, and call him up. So there used to be this, so before, I want to throw you back to the 90s when Minnesota Historical Society really only acknowledged black communities, maybe talented 10th, so to speak, in one placard. And I think Tina Burnside of the Minnesota African American Heritage Museum and Gallery tracked this. So this used to exist, and it may even still exist. And I always felt that our presence went beyond this. And here's a shot of the Minnesota African American. Has anybody been up to Minneapolis to see it? The Minnesota African American History Museum and Gallery. It's a beautiful space, high ceilings. But in creating exhibits, I wanted to get away from text fatigue. And here we go with Soulforce. I listened to and I guess I watched a Zoom on Black, Brown, and Red Power, moderated or given by this Chicano scholar named Dr. Jimmy Patino at the U of M. And if you'd like, that video still exists. Has anybody heard of East Side Freedom Library? They have these great speakers and great presentations and authors and keynotes and really sort of a wealth of history and presentations that don't make their way to the mainstream, and it's a library. Have you heard of it, Bethany? East Side Freedom Library?
No, I haven't.
Oh, be sure to. Yeah. If you really want to dig into it, we did the Red Nation, Nick Estes, who is Dakota, has a YouTube channel where we sort of teased out this idea of Soulforce, which I'm belaboring, and we'll get to. Also, Al McFarlane of Insight News, a newspaper magnet, really, did a conversation that you can find on YouTube, as well as, and Bethany mentioned this earlier, a podcast to listen to that was done by MNHS on Soulforce. And I keep saying Soulforce because I've finished the context of where I'm at. I was influenced by other exhibits. Normally I don't get influenced by, I don't know if exhibits really stand out to me. I mean, they're powerful, they're reading, they're standing, there's a little bit of fatigue involved, but it's usually minimal photos and plenty of text, which maybe I was against as a kid, but don't mind it that much anymore. And there was 2 exhibits at the Hennepin History Museum, one called Separate Not Equal, which was about the integration of a white school. This is kind of busing era, 1975-ish, I want to say. In South Minneapolis, there was kind of a Mason-Dixon line, which was the Minnehaha River, or creek, between one part of South Minneapolis and another part. And then Human Toll, which was about 35W and the dislocation and displacement of black families in that community intentionally to create 35W with the federal highway system from the 60s into, from the late 50s into the 60s. I enlisted a designer. I consider myself a interdisciplinary artist, meaning I need collaborators in order to work. I can't paint, I can't illustrate, I can write, but even that I like to collaborate on. So I'm heavily dependent on other collaborators. And for Soulforce, I knew that I wasn't a designer, nor could I work graphic design programs. And plus, she's talented. Blackbird Revolt is the name of her company. She also teaches at, she's a tenured professor at the U. And she did, I think she did. That's right. How you know Teresa's bio, I have no idea. I'm not asleep. He's mad about that. All right. I'm also, and I don't, for a guy who maybe doesn't like a lot of text, sometimes graphs and data tell me more than a paragraph of text. So I was like, can I combine pictures and data without being boring? And I'm also fascinated with the 60s, the turbulent 60s. Any of y'all remember the 60s? Right? There were even statements like, people were wondering if this was going to tear the country apart. And there wasn't a timing element to this, but history has a way of repeating itself. And I was looking at some of the assassinations. So after this, watching this Zoom on red, brown, and black power in the Twin Cities, I started to, dive into the rabbit hole that is the 60s and 70s. And obviously, most people can recall Martin Luther King being shot, John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, right after John F. Kennedy. And then, but there was also figures like Fred Hampton in Chicago, the leader that J. Edgar Hoover felt might be the Messiah that would unite white and black and cross class and racial lines in the movement. I had the good fortune of meeting his son at my apartment space of all places, because there's an organizer that lives in the building, and that was a real gem of a moment. So I was not only interested in the big figures that we knew of that were assassinated or were crucial, but also the grassroots. And then I started realizing there was a fascination with male leaders and centralized movements, as opposed to decentralized, which is more Black Lives Matter. Yes, some people can maybe pinpoint the 3 women that were behind it, but really it's more of a decentralized movement that one can't point a finger to, as in like Cesar Chavez with the United Farm Workers, or MLK with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and NAACP. So I was interested in both small, unknown soldiers, for lack of a better word, but I think an appropriate word, in both the Chicano movement, meaning Mexican immigrants, probably not the greater diaspora that could include Central America, but just strictly Mexican, as well as whites, college students, indigenous, and black folk. So I was dealing with three communities here, and I tried to do my homework by talking to daughters of the movement when it came to the American Indian movement, including Valerie Martinez and Mary Lagarde, her father Joe Lagarde, executive director of the reservation just outside of Moorhead, and Mike Forsha, known for pulling down the statue of Columbus that was in St. Paul, and Frank Pero, the co-director of the American Indian movement. The big names had passed on. Dennis Banks had passed on. The Belcourt brothers had passed on, as well as Russell Means. But Bill Means is still alive. So there was also this sort of, it's interesting, after the deaths of the post-civil rights movement also intrigued me because it seemed to be a time of cynicism. We were dealing with Watergate, the loss in Vietnam. Suddenly, communities that couldn't find their voice were having a voice. There was busing. Integration was finally sort of taking hold, and there was pushback. So I guess I was interested in both the whole bucket and the whole mess that was occurring in America. But sometimes this all just gets whittled down to MLK's "I Have a Dream," and then it was all good, or like that was just the penultimate of the movement. But there was fallout and there was pushback, and I felt like exploring it. I was lucky enough to have family album, basically, of some of these community cultural centers. One was known as The Way on Plymouth Avenue in Minneapolis. Have folks been up to Minneapolis and maybe gone to the north side? There's downtown, and then there's the north side, and then there's the suburbs. So it's this little pocket. Daryl and myself live on the north side. I hail from one of those suburbs, Brooklyn Park, in the 60s and 70s, but I used to go to the camp, the boys club camp, and interact with these Way kids. And I think my mom even wanted me to go to the Way just to sort of open up my mind. But it was a cultural heritage center that a guy like Prince came out of, a little boy that used to get excited about a music course that was being taught there, and learning that this guy could play bass, and this guy was a great drummer, and basically the melting pot of the Minneapolis sound, I think, stems from, oh, look at that, that segued perfectly, into what's known worldwide as the Minneapolis sound. So there's a young picture of Prince. And in fact, some youngsters, one of them right above him, playing at the Walker. I can't imagine just the Walker having an event nowadays where they've got just some young black musicians that are, probably pre-teen, putting on a show. It's kind of a unique snapshot of the place and time. And you know what? Kids don't even have, kids don't even have foot races anymore, do they, in the streets? Anyways. But to think of the possibility of driving through Plymouth or attending one of these little music festivals and really witnessing the birth of a sound that is known worldwide and is heavily associated with Prince and the time. And I'm forgetting a third band that I probably should be including. But parallel stories, I didn't realize, and Daryl pointed this out to me, the almost exact 100-year
Centennial anniversary of 2 significant deaths in the state of Minnesota.
by asphyxiation based on false accusations, as in a counterfeit bill or drug-induced reaction, or the raping of a young girl in Duluth. Has anybody been up to see the Clayton Jackson McGee in Duluth? It's a beautiful memorial with a large expanse, some great quotes, beautiful bas-relief renditions of the 3 fallen men. And I think the lamppost where this lynching occurred is still there, but it's not marked. But there's an energy there that when I visited immediately evoked tears without even having to start reading anything or just sort of connecting. I was also inspired, as you can tell. There's sort of this scattershot approach of like I had all these ideas. How can I condense this? I was inspired by the constellations because they're sort of set in space and have the longest history that we know of, more than our Earth-based human history. And I felt it might even be fun to sort of map it as map the movements and the players. But then I realized, okay, well, this is the opposite of what I want because I'm overloading text. So I think I struggle, at least in getting these thoughts into an exhibit on the form it takes. So the process then went to the idea of a force, and I think of black holes being powerful, but sort of the unknown, and dark and scary. The Milky Way is inspiring, but again, that's star mapping. And I guess if I could do it with collage photos, it would turn out to be a muddy mess. There were these cartoons, and maybe y'all have encountered them if you ever go through old newspapers, that almost say more than the articles themselves about relations, or in jest, they tell more in their provocative nature. And I know that at this time in North Carolina, they were fearing black rule because of Reconstruction and black officials getting elected. So I started looking at the prologue. What really preceded this backlash? Obviously I knew about slavery, but this wasn't about excavating slave and slave ownership in that era. It was more about reconciliation and putting these, why there was continual needs for movements to push back to counter this sort of white supremacy. And I think some of the roots lie in the animosity that came out of the Civil War and Reconstruction era. And this turning of the tables. Oh, well then, if they're in power, they, meaning African Americans, they're going to turn us into their slaves. And you saw some of this with Obama, signs that said, Obama's plan is white slavery, and then that whole sort of healthcare, they felt that was going to be, whatever, socialism and all the things that came with that. And then I started discovering political compromises that occurred in order for the South to get the vote. for politicians to get the South and maintain power in positions. So, and then the idea of colonization, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and Philippines being extensions of America's manifest destiny. So I was biting off more than I could chew. There was also pushback of elected officials engaging in black elected officials only awarding contracts to black-owned businesses, which occurred in Atlanta with the building of the airport. And as if I didn't have enough influences, Russian constructivism, which was sort of early artwork that had a message, was also something that intrigued me just by happenstance. I don't know much about art history or art per se, but it spoke to me when it came to collage. As did some work of the indigenous. There was artwork that I had no idea of, that a lot of indigenous artists, the paper, instead of getting a blank canvas to work on, they were the paper that they were given, or the canvases, was actually just former ledger paper. And is it just me, or isn't this really interesting? I mean, someone could say that it's, you know, it's overload, and that why is that not rendered on a blank canvas? But I think that those layers appealed to me, as did some of these flyers. And I know Daryl's a big fan of flyers, whether it had to do with a socialist newspaper cover of the Militant, or a NAACP flyer about lynching. There was something unique about the graphic spacing and composition and font used. Again, as well as like what was happening in the US between 65 and 70. Some would call it domestic terrorism, or actually early examples of it. Not necessarily pinned to one community or another. If anybody's aware of the Weather Underground, you ever heard of the Weather Underground? Stemming off of the Students for Democratic Society, I think, SDS, a anti-war splinter of white college students that engaged in a lot of destruction of property in response to the war, usually connected to funders of the war. And the only time it killed a person, or the only time it resulted in a death, was in the death of one of their own building the bomb. There's a documentary called Weather Underground if you're interested. I'll stop for a second and say Soulforce is an exploration of almost all of this, but it's, and I ultimately won't be showing you the exhibit because I'd like you to come up and see it at Mill City, or if it lives online at some point. Hopefully this fascinating presentation that I'm giving you will plant seeds to come and see it. But these campaigns that were happening between the late 60s and early 70s also had really fun graphics. Again, there must be a latent designer in me that connects with certain aesthetics, like we all do, and is not interested in others. So I wanted to incorporate some of these patriotic, working the flag into the exhibit itself. It's not, because the flag isn't really owned by one. It seems now to have a nationalism to it that might only be owned by MAGA, but that flag has the blood of all of the communities in it. In one respect, I think I'd like to take back the flag and let it be everybody's. But there was a movement called the Brown Berets. They existed both in Colorado. Well, they were a national movement with pockets in Colorado, St. Paul, Minneapolis, as well as California. There was a semi-infamous trial. Not semi-infamous. There was an infamous trial of the Chicago 8. Do we remember the Chicago 8? Yeah. And I'm not a boomer, by the way. I'm a Gen X, sort of retreading some of that history. But they literally and figuratively and physically chained and gagged Bobby Spiel for wanting to speak and represent himself. That judge engaged in that, and it flies in the face of everything we think of that we stand on when it comes to our rights and freedoms in this country in a court of law. You would think it would never result in that, but there it is. And it went on for days. I was kind of intrigued by conspiratorial criminality, whether that was the mafia, because it always and the CIA, because they all kind of get blended together when you start investigating the relationship and who carries out assassinations, whether it be JFK or any later assassinations for plausible deniability reasons. And then Minneapolis, why is all this happening in Minneapolis? As of late, as of not so late, and it's early history. Whether that be a general strike in the 30s, or just are we a pocket of radicalism? Are we a Berkeley of the Midwest? Certainly there's been friction between the MPD and the African American community longer than George Floyd. That preceded George Floyd, so I thought I would track that, if it was trackable, or at least acknowledge it. Same with our American Indian movement. That is something that is unique to our to North Minneapolis, where you had this overlap of a Chicano community, a Black community, and an American Indian community. It doesn't happen in every metropolitan area, but when you've got segregation plus diverse communities in a time period where they're both countering and looking for self-determination and helping each other out, that's really early and maybe even a precedent for intersectional ethnic solidarity. In fact, they took their fight to the United Nations, and where their declaration was adopted, which is like a long fight and a global fight that they succeeded in, and rooted here in Minneapolis. And I thought, why is this not a feather in our cap, no pun intended, to be acknowledged? Same with the Chicano movement. People don't even know the term. Myself, I was like, what is Chicano? Is that a play on dropping the M and the E from Mexico? And there's a Mexica, early indigenous, and forgive me if I'm being sort of reductive, but it was a term embraced by Mexicans that wanted to get to the roots of embrace their indigenous and African roots and Spanish roots, or colonist roots. They're really a mixed blood roots. Some of the graphics of the American Indian movement also were appealing to me. Have we heard of Wounded Knee? Yeah. So there's kind of two phases to Wounded Knee, which are marked there. You can think of the massacre that occurred in 1890 or the recent, the 1970s one, which involved some FBI agents. There's Valerie. Oh, you get a peek at Soulforce, the panels. I forgot about this. Valerie is the daughter of the American Indian movement. Actually hails from New Mexico, but has lived up here in Minnesota for quite some time. She's sort of a seed, and I'm being reductive again, but she knows she's been acknowledged as like a seed keeper of sorts. So because I had no in, for lack of a better term, with the Indigenous community, she helped navigate a lot of that. And she did a smudge ceremony for this. Do we know what smudging is? Have we engaged in that? Oh, so these are great things. These are rituals and ceremonies that the smoke rises up to the, and I'm being reductive again, but you know, they're holy ceremonies that invoke. Oh, there, I'm done. That invoke the creator and greater spirits and ancestors to come into the room, and it's really welcoming and a beautiful thing. And I was fortunate enough to have her do that for the first opening of Soulforce. Oh, there's even video, which I'll skip. There was an alignment even with Central Americans there between the indigenous, that's Vernon Belcourt, and the Sandinistas. Have we heard of the Sandinistas? Do you remember that? That's sort of an 80s thing. It feels like Nicaragua. So all of this crossing of borders and solidarity, I wondered if it could be explored in panel form. Ultimately, I created 13 panels with my collaborators, Valerie, as well as Dr. Jimmy Patino, that sort of landmark what a grassroots movement might go through. There's always a prologue. There's usually an inciting incident, which I call the cause, confrontation, collaboration, destruction, duplicity, and hopefully these aren't terms that are too heady or academic, but there is definitely a narrative arc to grassroots movements. There's a decline or a legacy, collaboration, and so I did my best to chart those moments in a movement, and that allowed me to explore through the photo collage national and local incidents that reflect those terms. And actually that's probably what you saw when it said national in those panels. Maybe I should have brought the panels, but that keeps, no, yeah. I finally did end up with a logo. I used a little celestial Jupiter or Saturn. Is it Jupiter or Saturn that has the rings? Look at that. Jupiter's got the red dot, right? Jupiter's got the dot. Saturn has the rings. All right. So I was able to work in my graph thing. Here's another example of interethnic solidarity. You've got Corky Gonzalez, leader of a Mexican movement whose name escapes me right now, as well as Angela Davis. Do we remember Angela Davis?
We do. She's the keynote speaker at this year's NAACP dinner in the fall.
Look at that. She's also an educator at, a professor at, yeah, maybe even Ivy League. But boy, was she, they were ready to electrocute her in the 70s with a trumped up charge of being the gun owner that killed, the owner of the gun that killed a judge in Salinas, I believe it is. You know, just really tenuous stretch of imagination. But Luckily, they did away with the death penalty in California, and a white farmer posted her bail, and it extended the, I'm reducing this, it extended her bail, or the court case, to the point where the public actually, and the jury, found her not guilty, and then hung out with her at the party afterwards. And then there's Stokely Carmichael, who became Kwame Ture, probably most famous for, or associated with the word Black Power in 1966, which shows that shift from Martin Luther, in fact, MLK was there, the shift between in the mind's eye of most of the white public, they felt it was a call to violence, but really it was a call for direct action and ownership and autonomy and self-determination, which wasn't pro-integration as the NAACP was. And then there's John Trudell next to Corky. So you've got the Indian movement here, the Black Power movement, and the Mexican community movement in a couple of shots. That also has its roots in the and in the women's liberation. Plymouth Avenue. Does anybody remember Plymouth Avenue uprisings in Minneapolis or heard about it? It had sort of two phases in 66 and 67. One based on a grocery store owner shooting a customer. The other based on a Aquatennial parade, police brutality against a pregnant black woman who then miscarried. So it's out of some of this exploration, there was a group known as the Soulforce. And they were, if you think of Black Panthers, and if you think of an interracial Black Panthers, and if you subtract any violent aspects, this is what's happening in the late 60s and early 70s, known as the Soulforce or Soul Patrol in North Minneapolis, to keep out folks, or to be a community presence, almost like this community policing that we're discussing nowadays, that involves de-escalation and communication with from the community wherever the incident occurs to the powers that can de-escalate it or help apprehend. So it's early community policing, and it's white, and it's black, and it's male, and it's female, and it's in North Minneapolis. And there were rabble-rousers that would come into communities back in the day, and maybe that still occurs. Yeah, it does occur. That like to stir up, almost agent provocateurs, whether they realize it or not. And they would be kept track of. Nowadays, I think they'd all have iPhones and be videotaping. But there it was in a nutshell. I was finally like, oh, Soulforce, that is such a great idea, and it works as, it ties back to MLK's civil rights, and it speaks to the moment. It was actually a Freedom Riders idea. Zev Eloni, a Jewish Freedom Rider who lived in Minnesota. Do you remember the Freedom Riders? They were trying to desegregate buses and amongst other things in the South. The Poor People's Campaign, which was kind of, and I'm wrapping up here, the Poor People's Campaign, which was really the death knell. RFK it was planned with MLK in mind. MLK was assassinated, and so was RFK during the middle of it. But that encampment that took over DC's lawn there was really just trying to get the idea of poverty, which MLK was one of the three big evils, trying to put that at center stage for the government to address it. And LBJ was trying to have a great society. There were efforts in that direction, but poverty, well, Vietnam and the space race took a lot of the funding away, as well as this benign neglect that the administrations seem to take hold of as a policy towards communities of color. But they were kicked out kind of shamefully by the National Guard, you know, kicking poor people out of the nation's capital, who are there almost like the March on Washington for the poor, to me seems so shameful. And they'd lost both leaders, because a lot of people transferred their hopes from MLK to RFK, who died or was killed on June 4th, or around midnight of June 5th. 1968. Another example of interaction, Angela came up to Lake Bede-Makaska, what some people know as Lake Calhoun, a U of M professor. There's Clyde Belcourt of the American Indian Movement. So we don't think of, this is a concept by Jimmy Patino, of horizontal history. We think of silos, and forgive me, I really am wrapping up. But instead of thinking of siloed communities, American Indian Movement, Black Power Movement, Chicano Movement, Women's Movement, there's this overlap, and now it's known as intersectionality, but there's a lot of, if we can flatten that idea and think of them horizontally instead of siloed, it helps delineate the needs of the community and the similarities, which I think we should be, it's a way of looking at commonalities. And that's a wrap. These are more just influential pictures that I felt were tied into some of the problems that Soulforce was trying to solve. Covenants, redlining, mapping, and the war. Even though Sylvester Stallone has nothing to do with Soulforce, I kind of dug the design of this postcard and would love it. And same with the hunger wall that the Poor People's Campaign created. It was just this wonderful mix of fonts and color, and actually there's a picture back here of the entire wall. Spontaneous, not enlisted by artists, just common people. Statements, color, drawings. And I think, and then there was this Obama montage that I thought was cool, which is a thing that you can do with photos. And then I took a trip to DC, to the African American History Museum. Has anybody seen that? Boy, is that heavy. Is that heavy? I didn't get past, I got to the first floor, but you start a couple floors down for history, like in the 1700s, or prehistory. And then you work your way up, and it's, I don't want to speak for you, but impactful.
Yeah, so totally.
Right. Yeah. And unfiltered, just, yeah. And tons of new stories that someone that even thought they were familiar with. But in a way, they give short shrift to the 80s and 90s. But they did have this cool depth thing exhibit for Obama, which I thought was a nice way of, instead of spreading things out, they used the x-axis instead of the y-axis. And that's it. I don't know why I included, if I had the money in the budget, I would have loved to engage in this kind of thing where you choose a movement. Here's the Freedom Riders that I referred to. you get the dilemma of what you should choose as if you were a movement member. Should you compromise and accept the first sort of position, as in Emmett Till, Mamie Till showing his body instead of a closed casket? Do we know Emmett Till? Yeah. But yeah, I was just blown away by this cool little, did you touch this thing at the, yeah? It existed. I saw some people at it and I was like, what is going on? But maybe this will be the next step if I get better at my presentations, which will take a while. But yeah, I just was really influenced by the African American Heritage Museum, or National African American Museum in DC, which I think Trump is trying to like somehow curate and trying to. Well, he did it with the Kennedy Arts Center. He wanted to put his name instead of alongside. Anyways, there seems to be. We're all aware of this erasure that's occurring, and it's going to the extent of even him arguing with, or his folks trying to change history in a literal sense at the Smithsonian and the African American history. So thank you so much. I overloaded this. I should have worked in a little time, but I appreciate each and every one of you for showing up, and I'm working on my presentation skills and maybe falling on my face, but I appreciate the attention. Thank you.
Don't apologize, you're doing great.
It's scattered though, right?
That's great.
All right. Thank you so much.